Jack woke up to the sterile scent of disinfectant and the rhythmic beeping of distant machines. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rust and old blood. His throat was dry, scratchy, as if he'd been breathing dust for days. The sheets beneath him were stiff, the fabric rough against his skin. His arms ached, as though he'd been restrained for too long. The room was dimly lit, its pale green walls peeling at the edges. He blinked hard, trying to steady himself, but his head pounded like a distant drum. He was lying on a hospital bed, though he had no memory of arriving there. No IV in his arm, no machines hooked up to him, and no sound of footsteps or voices. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his bare feet hitting cold tile. No slippers, no sign of personal belongings. His fingers traced the hem of the hospital gown, thin, papery, like something meant for a disposable patient. "Hello?" His voice sounded alien in the silence. No response, no movement. He was alone. Jack pushed himself upright, his muscles protesting with a dull ache. He scanned the room, searching for clues. Was he in a hospital? Or something pretending to be one? The walls were bare, except for an old analog clock mounted above the door, its hands frozen at 3:17. He frowned. Had it stopped, or had time itself refused to move forward? A door creaked open before he could reach for it. He flinched. A narrow hallway stretched ahead, lined with doors. Identical, white, numbered. The overhead lights flickered, as if unsure whether to stay on or surrender to the darkness. Something felt off. The air was thick with something unspoken, an invisible weight pressing against his chest. Jack hesitated before stepping out, glancing behind him, only to find that the hospital room was gone. The hallway was now endless. His breath came fast and shallow. The walls seemed closer than before, pressing in. He turned in a slow circle, searching for an exit, a sign, anything. His gaze locked onto the first door on his right, room 101. The numbers were painted in neat black strokes, precise but lifeless. A whisper of unease crawled up his spine. Something in him resisted, but his hand moved on its own. The cold metal handle turned beneath his palm. The door didn't budge. He pushed harder, feeling an odd resistance, not like a lock, but as if something on the other side was pushing back. A slow, rhythmic creaking echoed from behind the door, like an old chair rocking back and forth. A chill prickled along Jack's arms. He took a step back. The hallway stretched ahead, more doors looming, waiting, but something was wrong. The flickering light above him cast too many shadows. One of them moved. Jack whipped around. Nothing, just the doors. The silence now had weight, thick like static before a thunderstorm. Then, the door to room 101 creaked open. The hallway lights flickered harder, buzzing like angry wasps. A shadow stretched from inside the room, long and unnatural, spilling out across the floor. The air turned stale. Then, a whisper, soft, familiar. "Come in." Jack's stomach twisted. Every part of him screamed to turn back, to run, but his feet moved forward anyway. The darkness swallowed him whole. Inside, a childhood bedroom greeted him. His childhood bedroom. The twin bed with its astronaut-themed blanket, The old wooden dresser, covered in stickers, the nightlight still glowing faintly in the corner, and sitting on the bed was himself, no older than 6, staring at the floor. Jack felt his breath catch. What the hell? The child. Jack lifted his head slowly, his eyes hollow and black, like 2 burnt-out stars. You left me here, he whispered. Jack stumbled back, his pulse hammering in his ears. The air in the room felt heavier now, suffocating, like a hand pressing down on his chest. The walls seemed to warp slightly, bending inward as if the room itself was inhaling. The boy shifted on the bed, gripping the old toy car tighter, his fingers whitening. I waited for you, he murmured, his voice flat. You never came back. Jack swallowed hard. I don't understand. Came back from where? The boy tilted his head, his eyes reflecting nothing. From when you forgot. Jack shook his head. His thoughts scrambled. He wanted to deny it, to tell the child he had never forgotten. But something deep inside twisted in protest. A memory, fragmented, just out of reach. The astronaut blanket, the baseball glove, the nightlight. Something important, something buried. A shadow flickered in the corner of the room. Jack turned sharply. For a moment, he swore he saw movement, a figure shifting in the darkness. But when he blinked, it was gone. The nightlight cast a weak glow, its beam flickering like a dying breath. You need to remember, the boy whispered. Jack's chest ached. The room smelled more strongly of dust now, but beneath it, something acrid, something rotten. He had to leave. He took a slow step back. I don't belong here. I need to go. The boy's fingers curled tighter around the toy car. You always say that, but you never leave. Jack's heartbeat pounded against his ribs. What do you mean? The boy climbed off the bed, his small sneakers scuffing against the floor. You think you're real, he said, voice colder now. But what if you're not? What if I'm the real one? Jack felt his blood run cold. The boy took a step forward. Jack stepped back. Another step forward. Jack's breath quickened. The air grew thick, cloying. Go ahead, the boy said. Run, but you'll just end up back here. Again and again. Jack reached behind him, his fingers scrambling for the doorknob. The boy's lips curled into a slow, eerie smile. The lights flickered violently. The shadows in the room stretched toward him. Jack's fingers finally grasped the cold metal handle, and he wrenched the door open. He stumbled back into the hallway, his breath ragged. The door slammed shut behind him with a deafening bang. He turned, pressing his forehead against the door, trying to calm his breathing. Behind it, muffled laughter rang out, distorted and childlike. Jack squeezed his eyes shut. His hands were shaking. He had to move forward. He had to get out. His breathing slowed, but his pulse continued to race. The hall was silent again. The walls stretched endlessly in either direction, the shadows pressing closer than before. The air was heavier now, thick and cloying, like a dense fog settling into his lungs. A new sound, faint but distinct, emerged from beyond the closed door. Scratching, slow, deliberate, like nails dragging along wood. Jack swallowed hard. He forced himself to turn away, to face the long hallway ahead. His mind screamed at him to keep moving. One step, then another, and then he saw it. Not just a door that was opening. Room 202. Jack hesitated in front of the next door. Room 202. The number gleamed under the weak, flickering light. The air felt colder now, damp, with something unseen. A faint sound, almost like a sigh, seeped through the crack under the door. His fingers hovered over the handle, reluctant, but an invisible force urged him forward. He stepped inside. A dimly lit apartment materialized around him. The smell of whiskey and stale cigarettes hung thick in the air. Jack's stomach tightened. He recognized this place, his place, but not as it was now, as it had been on that night. The overturned coffee table, the broken lamp, the shattered frame on the floor, the photo of him and her. He swallowed hard, and there she was, standing near the door, her arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes were red, puffy, but determined. "I begged you to stop, Jack," she whispered. "I tried. I really did." Jack's throat tightened. "No, this isn't real." She shook her head, tears welling up. "But it is." A gust of cold air blew through the room. The door slammed shut behind him. Jack jumped, his breath hitching. He turned back to her, but she had moved closer, her gaze filled with something unreadable. Anger, sorrow, maybe both. "You don't get to forget, Jack." Her voice cracked. "You don't get to walk away." Jack's heart pounded. "I tried to make things right. I don't even drink anymore." But it was too late, wasn't it? She wiped at her face, her fingers trembling. "You let it all fall apart." A dull, rhythmic thud echoed from the other side of the apartment. Jack stiffened. "Did you hear that?" She didn't react. Her eyes remained locked onto him. The thudding grew louder, closer. It came from the darkened hallway leading to the bedroom. Jack took a hesitant step forward, but her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist. "You don't want to see," she whispered. Jack wrenched his arm away. The darkness in the hallway deepened, thickening like tar. The thudding stopped. Then came a sound that sent ice down his spine. Breathing, deep, raspy, unnatural. Something was in there. Jack stumbled back, but the air around him tightened, pressing against his chest. The walls warped like melting wax, the shadows stretching long and claw-like. "You never wanted to face it," she said. "You think locking it away makes it disappear?" Her voice had changed. It was no longer hers. It was something else. Jack's pulse roared. The air grew heavier, the breathing from the hallway growing closer. He could feel it now. Something massive, lurking in the dark, its presence suffocating. The photo on the floor cracked. The lamp flickered wildly, and then it stepped out, a towering figure, faceless yet familiar, its shadowy form shifting like smoke. Jack's entire body screamed at him to run, but he couldn't move. The thing lurched forward. Jack's body finally obeyed. He turned and bolted for the door, his fingers fumbling with the lock. His breath came in frantic gasps. Behind him, the apartment twisted, the walls closing in, the air filling with whispers, his own voice mocking, accusing. "You ran from me once, Jack, but you can't run forever." His fingers found the handle. He yanked the door open and tumbled into the hallway. The cold air hit him like a wave. The moment he crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind him. Silence fell. Jack collapsed against the opposite wall, his heart pounding, his body drenched in sweat. He stared at the door, half expecting it to burst open, but it didn't. Instead, the number on the door changed. Room 303. Jack forced himself to his feet, his breath unsteady. He didn't want to go on, but he had no choice. He turned the handle and stepped inside. Jack hesitated before room 303. His breath was still uneven, his pulse hammering from the last encounter. The number on the door gleamed under the dim light, almost pulsing. The air around it felt different, thicker, as if the door itself was breathing. He didn't want to open it. He didn't want to see what was inside, but he had no choice. The handle was ice cold against his palm. He turned it slowly, and the door swung inward, revealing a hospital room. But not just any room. Jack stepped inside, his stomach twisting. In the center of the room was a hospital bed, and lying on it was himself, older, weaker, tubes snaking into his arms. A heart monitor beeped slowly, each sound dragging him closer to the unbearable truth. His own lifeless face stared back at him, eyes half-lidded, mouth slightly open. His chest barely rose and fell beneath the thin, white sheet. Jack took a step closer. His hands trembled. No, this isn't real. A chair sat beside the bed, empty but expectant. The silence in the room felt unnatural, too perfect. The walls were blank, the windows covered in sheer white curtains that didn't move, even though no air stirred. And then he saw it. Figure stood in the farthest corner of the room, tall, draped in black, no face, just a shifting void where a head should be. Jack's breath stilled. The air grew colder. The thing didn't move, didn't breathe, but it was watching him. Jack swallowed hard, his fingers curling into fists. Who are you? Silence. A slow, mechanical beep from the monitor. The heart rate was slowing. Jack's heart rate. The figure tilted its head, the motion unnatural, like a puppet whose strings had been pulled too sharply. A voice, his own voice, echoed in the room. That depends on you. Jack flinched. The thing took a step forward. His pulse roared. What does that mean? No answer. The lights in the room dimmed. The figure's shadow stretched across the walls, swallowing everything in its path, even the bed. Jack's own body, his older self, began to fade, like dust dissolving into the air. He backed away. His foot hit something. Another door. It hadn't been there before. Jack turned. This door was different. Black, pulsing with something dark and infinite. It had no number. Behind him, the figure moved again. You have to decide. The voice rattled in his skull, shaking something loose inside him. He knew what this was. A choice. Stay here, fade, become nothing, or go through the last door. Jack looked at the hospital bed, the last remains of his old self, turning to ash. The figure was closer now, too close. Jack's hand found the handle of the black door. His heart pounded, his lungs burned. The air inside the hospital room was collapsing, folding in on itself. The walls vanished, leaving nothing but darkness. With a deep breath, he stepped through. Jack opened his eyes. He was standing outside. The sun was warm against his skin. A light breeze ruffled his hair. He turned, expecting to see the hospital, but it was gone. The road stretched before him, endless, familiar, and waiting at the end of it, a house. His house. Jack inhaled sharply. His heart was still beating. He was alive, but he didn't know if he had chosen correctly. Not yet. With slow, steady steps, he walked forward, toward whatever waited on the other side.